We should do that. Thank you so much for that amazing gift, Jason. We're so glad you're here and with us every Sunday, but especially today, sharing that with us. Yeah. All right.
Across the line, we have everyone stand on one side of the room. We got a couple of tape lines down on the floor. And I just call out different categories that relate to oppression or privilege or life experiences that people have. And if I call out something that applies to someone, you just cross over the line and then turn and face the group from which you came.
Please cross the line if you have ever been hurt or judged because of the color of your skin, your cultural background, or your ethnicity. There are a lot of people that want to act like it's no big deal, like it doesn't exist. Right now, I want you to look in the eyes of people who are standing across from you. It does exist, just right here.
It's a really powerful activity. We do it entirely in silence. And this really gives people an opportunity to kind of tell their life story without having to say anything. Because sometimes putting words to these things can be really difficult.
Please cross the line if one or more of your parents have passed away. Everyone else, please join them if an immediate family member or close friend has passed away. Once you get across that line, reach out to the people who are already standing there. Make sure every single one of them gets a hug. So often, we try not to think about the people we've lost because we just don't want to miss them. But right now, I'm going to encourage you to remember the wonderful things that this person brought to your life. How lucky you were to have them in your life for however long. And if that person were standing with you right now, what would you say?
It allows us to not only see what we have in common with the people around us that maybe we would have never guessed, the similarities that we have, but it's also a way to acknowledge our own experience and the things that maybe we've experienced, and allows us to see the things that maybe we're grateful for, the things that other people maybe have experienced that we haven't.
Please cross the line if you've ever been teased, hurt, humiliated, or put down by someone in this room. We get to decide how we use our words. We can use them as weapons against each other. Or we can use our words to lift up the people around us. It's up to us.
And it really tends to build a lot of connection with people to see what we have in common, builds a lot of compassion and understanding. And the entire day is kind of has that intention to bring more connection and understanding, so that moving forward, people feel like they're not alone, and that if they need somebody, they've got support, that they can be support for somebody else.
Please cross the line if you come from a family where alcohol or drugs have ever been a problem. So often, we think that we're crossing this line alone. But if you cross the line, please take a moment to notice how many people cross with you, how many people do understand.
You know, there's an acknowledgement in crossing the line for different things, about honoring the experiences that we've had, but also to recognize that they didn't stop us, and to really feel empowered moving forward in our lives. Well, I've survived these things, and I'm that much stronger, so I can survive everything else that comes my way. And I don't have to do it alone.
Continue to take care of the people around the support one another.
What you've just seen is a film, and it's just an excerpt, really, from an organization called Challenge Day. And what Challenge Day does is they go into middle and high school schools, and they bring the students together, and you saw the line that they put on the floor in the gymnasium, and they just repeatedly ask people, if this has happened to you, if this has happened to you, if this has happened to you, then cross the line. And what happens on these challenge days is that students begin to realize that the people that they may have judged or teased or seen in a particular way, or had just done away with or been mean to them, actually had things in common with them. And they discover in these challenge days that middle and high school students are able to realize at that younger age that actually the people they most wanted to deny or do away with or not be involved with in any kind of way were the people who they actually had things in common with. But they would never have managed to meet up with them had it not been for this experience on Challenge Day. It kind of points up to me that in all times and places, connection has been a need. Not a luxury, not a kind of nice thing, not a bonus, but a required to survive need. You heard that Brené Brown talks about connection as being hardwired. It's in us. We can't not be connected and still survive in any meaningful way. Some experts say you need 8 to 10 meaningful touches a day in order to feel healthy and whole and connected. So, people need connection. I just went to see my mother last week, which is why I wasn't with you last Sunday. She's 82 years old, doing very well actually. But we're beginning to talk about assisted living and her doing something different as she grows older. And I was struck in my conversation with her by understanding that her social construct is beginning to get smaller and smaller. And whether that's because she's the baby of 10 and she only has 2 siblings left, or whether it's because many of her peers have already passed, or she's not as able to be out and doing things like she did, and some of her friends are not able to be out and about as much. And so her social connection to people is beginning to shrink. And that is such a dangerous thing for people as we grow older. Have you ever been to a NICU unit at the hospital? The preemie babies, the ones they're not sure are going to live. And have you ever walked through one and seen the parents sitting beside those incubators that are closed in with their hand put inside the tube so that they can touch the baby? You know why? Not just because parents want to touch their children, but because it is crucial whether they will actually live or not. Touch and connection. And then you saw these high school students. They needed to be connected to each other. They needed to stop making up stories about each other. They needed to stop being bullies or making fun of each other, because they were actually making fun of themselves in the end, because they discovered a connection they had, because they had common experiences. Make sense? We need connection. We all do. Relationships, friendships, they are crucial. And so we sort of find ourselves in the church. And I don't mean just our church, but I mean all churches. If you've been keeping up at all, you know that the church, Christian church out there, the big Christian church, is in steep decline. People are leaving churches every day, all the time. And a part of the reason is because people don't feel connected. Not just not connected to God, because somehow we're not helping them do that, but also not connected to each other. And so it sort of begs the question, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to be that kind of church, or are we going to be a church that hopefully can help people find a way to be connected? When I think about this, I don't know anything else to do but to kind of go back in history and to glean something from places that we are deeply connected to. One of those places is the early church. You heard the scripture reading this morning. The early church that was very new in forming around this man Jesus, around their experience of this new guy, who was never a Christian, by the way. He was a Jew, he died a Jew, he didn't know about this, right? But these were new people who called themselves Christians. And the outside world persecuted them terribly. They were afraid for their lives constantly as they tried to build this Christian community. And so what they did was they met in each other's homes. That was a safe place. They read together, they ate together, they sang together. They shared each other's lives together. Now, did you notice that started little bitty in people's homes? And arguably, it is the greatest single happening through history that we've ever seen. Is the way that Christianity grew and spread, and still, and yet in this moment we see the decline. The decline because somehow connection is broken. I would also say, let's go back in our own roots with MCC, with Metropolitan Community Churches, to the living room of Troy Perry 50 years ago, where 12 people showed up. Now that was a good sign, the 12 people showed up. 12 people with very differing kinds of places that they were coming from in their life. But they had something in common, and that was that they felt like they were on the outside of things. They felt rejected, they felt invisible, they felt that no one really wanted them in their churches, and so that was what held them together in a living room when Troy Perry started Metropolitan Community Churches. 50 years later, churches in 37 countries. So there is something magic about being in rooms together, amen? There is something that is divinely ordered about us getting together and being connected to one another. Our popular and contemporary culture doesn't help us with this a bit. I mean, I guess on the one hand you could say that technology has helped us to be more connected in some ways. On the other hand, you could also argue that it keeps us from our human interaction, our one-on-one, in-person, together interaction. And so perhaps the church is a place where people can find that, because we all need it. So it has been this exploration about community that has brought us to meetup groups, to try to go back into history and take something from those two pieces of history and utilize them to show us the way. So obviously the early Christians had something in common. By the way, they didn't have a ton of things in common. They were different. They came from all different kinds of places. They did not know each other culturally. But they still came together because of their common desire to be a Christian, to follow the way of Jesus. And then in metropolitan community churches, people came together because they felt excluded in other churches, and beyond that had nothing in common. In that room that day, there were 2 Jewish people, 2 drag queens, 1 trans person. There were 3 lesbians, and 4 gay men. None of them knew each other. So they came from all kinds of places, but their common interest was that they wanted to be a church, even when the church had excluded them. You see? So these ideas about how do we get connected to each other in our common interests so that our connections become stronger. How do we get connected to people in this room and maybe outside this room who we would not naturally gravitate toward? But if we find a common interest that we have, we'll discover, oh, I get this person now. I understand them. I'll bet every one of you could recall a time in your life when there was someone that did not sit well with you. Everybody got one of those that you can just, right. Some of them are sitting close by, I imagine, all right? As my friend Candy would say, they just didn't go in and sit down every time you encountered them, right? So you developed this notion that you would steer clear from them. You harbored perhaps some anger or some judgment. You made up a story about them because of the way that they don't sit well with you. Anybody ever done this? And then, for whatever reasons, you encountered this person unexpectedly only to discover that they actually had a lot in common with you. Only to discover that perhaps some of the reasons they are the way they are is because of some of the things that have happened to them. You realize this, don't you? That when we meet people and we don't like them, or that doesn't feel right, or we feel uncomfortable, just remember, we don't know what's brought them to this moment. We don't know what their life experiences are that cause them to give us the finger in traffic. We don't know. We just don't know. We don't know about the people who rub us wrong in this room. We don't always know. But what if we did know? How would that change our hearts? How would it change who we come in and speak to on Sunday mornings? How would it change who we check up on and who we want to know better? I would submit to you it would change us drastically to have that chance. So this morning, we want to introduce you to the Meetup groups. Not just to have a bunch of groups. You know what? It's a lot of work to just have a bunch of groups. That is not the point. The point is to see if there's a way for us to help facilitate a way for people to come together on a common interest who might not otherwise have that chance. And in the process, cross those lines we saw at the beginning in the film. To have a chance to connect with people you might not have otherwise ever known. I'm going to ask Reverend Donna to come up because she's done a lot of work helping to put the Meetup groups together. I'm going to ask her to talk to you a little bit about what these Meetup groups will look like and what it means. And I want you to listen carefully so you'll know what we're asking you to do.
I don't know. I couldn't get around there.
Oh, that makes sense. That was a lot.
This is all changed around, you know.
Yeah,
I'm
it
trying
is.
to find my way. So the Meetup groups are going to have about 12 or 15 people in each group. And it's a short-term commitment, about 10 weeks for each group. And then we'll take a month off, and then we'll start all over again. You get to choose another group the next time. And
So
maybe
that means if you get in a group that you really don't like those people, or that didn't go so well, you get to choose again in 10 weeks. You get to choose again. But we hope you'll work hard at, connecting.
And maybe in 10 weeks, you'll want to be a leader of a group.
Right.
You'll meet once a week, and there's no hard rules, okay? So we know that things come up, and sometimes you won't be able to make your group. But the commitment to your group is more important than perfect attendance. Focus on making friends, have fun, and grow your faith.
So I want to ask the Meetup group leaders, if they will, to come and take their seats behind their particular groups. And then Donna and I are going to move to the floor to talk to them a little bit.